Welcome to this episode of The Setup. Today I want to talk about nock travel. It's a topic that you might not have thought about very much. It's something that we dealt with a lot when the compound bows were really bad. I mean, let's just be honest with it. This topic is, we had some really bad bows back in the 90s and even the early 2000s. So this became super important topic. It's less important now because the bows are a lot better, but it still does affect your tunability and the way that the arrow flies out of the bow. So let's talk about nock travel. Basically, this is the path that the arrow's knock, or the bow's nocking point. So in this case, it's a nocking loop, takes as it moves forward. So you want it to stay vertical, perfectly on line, going forward, and horizontally, perfectly on line. You don't want to go inside to side going forward, and you don't want it to go up or down going forward. So those are the two, let's say, problems that you can run into. And I'll talk real quick about what causes them and then really what makes it more relevant for now. The main reason that you can have poor vertical nock travel is the timing of the cams can be off. Like even a single cam bow has a precise timing point where it should be rotated to that spot. And you'll see there'll be timing marks, and you can look on your owner's manual about, making sure that the cam is timed. But on a 2-cam bow, it's even more important. And on a cam and a half bow like the Hoyts, it still makes a difference. What it means is when you hit full draw, both cams on a 2-cam or a cam and a half hit their wall point or their full draw point at the same exact time. So if I'm looking at it, you can see, if you look at the cam, you can see there's a spot here where as it wraps up the cable is going to touch on that point, on that little stopper. And it's the same on the top and the bottom. There's another one on the bottom limb. You want those cables that it's wrapping up to touch on those stopper points at exactly the same time. So if I draw it back, I look at it, I look at the top one, and it's just touching. I look at the bottom one, same thing, it's just touching. So they're both touching at exactly the same time. So that means that my timing is perfect. And even on a bow that's supposed to eliminate the problems with cam timing, you still want them to be perfectly timed. So that's vertical nock travel. I want both harness tracks to fall in, or both harnesses to fall into the flat part of the harness track or hit that draw stop at exactly the same time, the top and the bottom. And the one that gets there first, if you're going to fix it, you have to slow that one down. And you do that by shortening the harness cable that attaches to that cam. So you're going to need a bow press for that. And if you don't have one, then you can take it to a dealer and they can do it really quick and easy. To shorten the harness, all you do is put a twist in it, or 2 twists, try it again, and then just keep tweaking it that way until you get it perfect. But the one that gets there first, so the one that taps down ahead of the other one, you have to slow that one down. And like I said, all you're doing is just backing it off a little bit in its original starting position by shortening the harness attached to that cam. I want the timing to be perfect, even though these bows are a lot more forgiving than the stuff we shot, back in the 2-cam days. But it just takes me back. I guess it's a habit that dies hard for me, because we fought that every time I took my bow out, I would have to check the timing to make sure that it was still on. Otherwise, the bow was going to shoot terrible. I want to talk now about why the bows were so bad back in the, say, 80s, 90s, into the early 2000s, and then how the nock travel is still important to us. But the bows were so bad. I remember I used to have 2 bows everywhere I went. I'd have a primary and a backup, and one year I went out to Colorado on an elk hunt, and I drove out there, and I was driving an old Jeep Cherokee back then and didn't have an air conditioner, so it got super hot inside there. By the time I got there, the harnesses on both of those bows had stretched so much. The Fast Flight, which is a very unstable synthetic, compared to what we have now, that the harnesses had stretched so much that the cam timing was off a country mile on both of those bows. I remember cracking the first one out and shooting at a target at 20 yards with a fixed blade broadhead, and it hit the ground like the arrow hit the ground like halfway to the target. I mean, that's how bad the nock was moving up as the string was going forward. And people talk about, oh, you shouldn't shoot mechanical broadheads. Well, part of the reason we shot mechanical broadheads is because the bows were so bad, you know. And anyway, so you have to have a bow press with you when you're traveling, or you're just gonna have to fight it. Even my backup bow was way off. So that's vertical nock travel. You know, the timing really is dependent upon, or the forward nock travel is dependent upon the cam's timing. So the other one is the horizontal side-to-side nock travel. And this really depends upon, and I'm going to take a step back, the alignment of the cams with the string prior to and as you draw. And if they're off, if the string doesn't align with the cam, you can look at it and you can see that it's just like right down the line. I mean, these Hoyts are really good, but there were some bows back in the day where the cam would be kicked off at like a 5-degree angle. They were so bad, and it had to do with the spacing of the cam on the axle. It had to do with other elements of design, something to do with the limbs, even the way that the force was transmitted to the limb tips. But the cam would start at an angle, and then when you drew it, it got worse. So then what happened when the string went back, you know, the cam leaned further. When it went forward, it kicked back. Well, in the process of doing that, the nock point on the string had to move side to side. There were bows that you literally, and I'm not exaggerating now, we had to take the limbs off, epoxy the axle holes, and re-drill the axle holes in the limbs in order to get them straight enough so the cams didn't lean. Sometimes we'd have to take the cams off and re-space them to get them balanced better, you know, inside the limbs. It was a nightmare just trying to get rid of that side-to-side slashing arrow flight because of the cam lean. Well, bow companies have come so far since then. I mean, you know, these Hoyts are awesome. Like I said, I love them, but there is not a bow on the market right now that I know of that you couldn't pick up, you know, and look down the string and see that the string lined up with the cams prior to draw. So if it doesn't line up prior to draw, it's going to be even worse at full draw. So that's my point. Side-to-side nock travel really results, for the most part, from the cams leaning and then kicking, you know, back straight as the arrow goes forward. The other thing that can affect side-to-side nock travel is your grip. So if you got a lot of grip torque, so your bow snaps, like when you shoot it, when you shoot your bow, if it doesn't jump perfectly straight forward during the shot, if you see it rotate, you know, during the shot as it's following through, there's probably something built into what you're doing that's causing it to move sideways. You know, the back end of the bow is trying to kick. The string is not moving straight forward. And the one that I found that bothered or really caused me the most trouble was my anchor point. If I got too far around behind me with my right elbow, so now I'm not pulling in line with the arrow anymore. I'm pulling at an angle. So when my release breaks, the release is actually pulling at an angle to the string, not straight back from it, and that causes the string to go forward, you know, side to side as it's going forward. So that can make a really, really tough tuning problem to fix, because you're trying to blame it on the rest position or something else, when really it has to do with your shooting form. You know, whether it's your grip or where you're at full draw with your elbow and the forces acting on the end of the arrow. And you'll hear really good archery coaches talk about making sure you don't have any contact between the arrow's nock and the side of your face. It's the same thing, because you can set up that disturbance, you know, where the string is now moving side to side as it goes forward. And again, that's going to affect nock travel, which is going to affect the tunability of the bow. You know, there are probably some really bad bows still out there. So if you can't tune it, you might take a look at it. I remember writing for the magazines multiple times, articles and columns about, the subject line was, "Is your bow a lemon?" Because there were so many of them that were. I mean, that was a super popular topic, you know, 15, 20 years ago. But there probably are still a few carryovers, maybe from used bows and some of the stuff that's, you know, been out there for a while, where you still get these really bad nock travel problems. But more than likely, if you're experiencing it, it's going to have something to do with your shooting form. And like I mentioned, it's either going to be the way you're gripping it, like you're creating, torque on the bow, or it's going to have to do with, where you're pulling at full draw, whether you're pulling to the side, of the arrow shaft line, or straight in line with it. So hopefully you picked up something from this. I know it's kind of technical, but it still does make a difference when you're trying to set up a bow for hunting. Even today's modern bows, you can still have some little problems there that you need to understand. Well, I appreciate you joining me. I'll see you back here again soon for the next episode of The Setup. And remember to always dream big.